Imagine soaring through the sky, chasing a dream that defies gravity and human limits. Now imagine that dream vanishing without a trace. In 1937, the world watched as Amelia Earhart, a legend in her own time, embarked on her most daring adventure, an attempt to circumnavigate the globe. But what began as a quest for glory ended in one of history's most enduring mysteries. This is the story of Amelia Earhart's final flight, a journey into the unknown that continues to haunt us decades later. The Pacific Ocean stretched out like an endless sheet of glass, shimmering under the July sun in 1937. Amelia Earhart, the woman who'd already carved her name into the history books as the first female aviator to cross the Atlantic, was chasing something bigger. She wanted to circle the globe, a feat no one had ever pulled off quite like she planned. Beside her in the cockpit of her Lockheed Electra was Fred Noonan, a navigator with a reputation for finding his way across vast, featureless oceans. They were a dream team, or so it seemed, as they took off from Lae, New Guinea on July 2nd, headed for a speck of land called Howland Island, 2,500 miles away. It was the longest, most dangerous leg of their round-the-world flight. The air was thick with ambition, but something else hung there too: the weight of the unknown. Amelia and Fred had been at this for weeks, hopping from continent to continent, dodging storms, mechanical hiccups, and the exhaustion that comes with living in a metal tube for days on end. The Electra was a beast of a plane, but it wasn't invincible. Loaded with fuel for the 20-hour flight, it lumbered off the runway in Lae, barely clearing the trees. On board, they had a radio, a life raft, and enough supplies to survive a crash, if they were lucky. Howland Island, their target, was a needle in a haystack, a flat coral strip barely a mile long, surrounded by nothing but water. Miss a mile or two, and you'd never see it. The U.S. Coast Guard cutter Itasca was stationed nearby, ready to guide them in with radio signals and a plume of smoke. Everything was set, or so they thought. As the Electra droned over the Pacific, Amelia's voice crackled through the radio to the Itasca. "We're on the line of position, 157-337, she said, her tone calm but clipped. Fred had calculated their path using the stars and his sextant, a method that was more art than science in those days. The Itasca heard her loud and clear, but something was off. Amelia wasn't picking up their replies. The radio was a one-way street, her voice reaching out into the void without an answer. The crew on the Itasca started to sweat. They sent Morse code, voice messages, even lit up the ship's boilers to send a thick column of smoke into the sky. Nothing. Hours ticked by, and Amelia's transmissions grew more urgent. "We must be on you, but cannot see you," she said at one point, her voice tinged with frustration. "Gas is running low." By 8:43 a.m., her last message came through. "We are on the line 157-337. We are running north and south." Then silence. The search for Amelia and Fred was a logistical nightmare. The Pacific is unforgiving. Depths that plunge miles down, currents that could sweep debris halfway to Australia, and islands so remote they might as well be on another planet. The Navy threw everything at it: ships, planes, even an aircraft carrier. They combed the waters around Howland, hoping for a glint of metal or a shred of canvas from the life raft. Days turned into weeks, and still, nothing. The Itasca crew replayed those final radio calls, dissecting every word for clues. Amelia's voice had been steady, but there was an edge to it, like she knew time was slipping away. Fred's calculations were their lifeline, but even a small error in his math could have sent them hundreds of miles off course. The question wasn't just where they were, it was what happened.
One theory took hold early. They simply ran out of gas and ditched in the ocean. The Electra was heavy with fuel, but headwinds could have burned through it faster than planned. If they missed Howland, they'd have been flying blind, searching for any scrap of land. The life raft was their best shot, but surviving a crash in open water, then drifting for days without food or fresh water, the odds were brutal. Yet the lack of wreckage gnawed at investigators. The Pacific is vast, but a plane that size doesn't just disappear. Some wondered if they'd made it to an island, maybe one of the uninhabited atolls scattered across the region. Gardner Island, now called Nikumaroro, was a popular guess, about 400 miles from Howland, close enough to be plausible. Then there were the radio signals. In the days after their disappearance, amateur radio operators across the U.S. claimed to pick up faint distress calls. A teenager in Florida heard a woman's voice saying, "This is Amelia Earhart." Another in Wyoming caught fragments of a message about New York and water. The signals were chaotic, garbled, and often dismissed as hoaxes or interference. But they kept coming, some for days, fueling hope that Amelia and Fred were alive, maybe stranded on a reef, fighting to be heard. The Navy checked every lead, but the signals led nowhere. It was like chasing ghosts. Back in the States, Amelia's husband, George Putnam, refused to give up. He pushed for more searches, even funded private ones when the Navy called it quits after 2 weeks. The public was obsessed. Newspapers ran wild with speculation, from sensible to outright bizarre. Some said Amelia and Fred were captured by the Japanese, who were expanding their reach across the Pacific. Tensions were high in 1937, and Japan's military wasn't exactly welcoming to stray American planes. Could they have landed on a Japanese-held island and been taken prisoner? No evidence supported it, but the idea stuck, fed by whispers of secret missions and espionage. Amelia was a celebrity, after all, maybe too famous to just vanish. Gardner Island was a speck in the Pacific, a coral atoll with a lagoon in the middle and barely enough dry land to stand on. In 1937, it was uninhabited, a forgotten dot on the map, about 400 miles southeast of Howland. No one thought much of it during the initial search. Why would Amelia and Fred end up there? But in 1940, a British colonial officer named Gerald Gallagher made a chilling discovery. Scattered among the coconut palms were human bones, a skull, and part of a skeleton. Nearby were objects that didn't belong: a woman's shoe, a sextant box, and a bottle of Benedictine liqueur. Things that screamed outsider. Gallagher's report suggested the remains could be Amelia's or Fred's. The bones were shipped to Fiji for analysis, measured and debated. But this was 1940. World War II was raging, and the world had bigger problems. The bones were lost, the records buried, and the lead went cold. Decades later, researchers with the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, or TIGHAR, zeroed in on Gardner, now called Nikumaroro, as the most likely spot for Amelia and Fred's final chapter. The group's theory was gripping. Amelia missed Howland, flew along that 157 to 337 line she mentioned in her last transmission, and landed on Gardner's flat reef at low tide. The Electra could have touched down intact, giving them a chance to survive as castaways. The island had fish, birds, and some fresh water, but it was brutal. Scorching days, no shade, and relentless mosquitoes. If they made it there, they wouldn't have lasted long without rescue. TIGHAR's expeditions found tantalizing clues: a campfire site, aluminum panels that might have come from the Electra, and more bones, possibly human, possibly turtle. Nothing was definitive, but it was enough to keep the theory alive. The Japanese capture theory never went away either. In the 1960s, a woman named Josephine Akiyama claimed she saw Amelia and Fred on Saipan, a Japanese-controlled island, in 1937. She said they were prisoners, their plane hidden away.
Other stories trickled out. Locals in the Marshall Islands claiming a white woman pilot was detained, even executed. The US government dismissed it all, but declassified documents later showed Amelia's flight path took her near Japanese territory. Was she spying for the US as some speculated? Her fame made her a liability if captured. No hard evidence, documents, photos, or wreckage ever backed up the claims, but the idea of a cover-up kept the story burning. Then there were the stranger theories. Some said Amelia survived, returned to the US, and lived under a new name. A 1970 book claimed she was Irene Bolam, a New Jersey housewife who bore a passing resemblance. Irene denied it, sued, and the theory collapsed, but it showed how desperate people were for answers. By the 1980s, the disappearance of Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan had become a legend, a puzzle that refused to be solved. Nikumaroro kept drawing researchers like moths to a flame. Tigar's expeditions in the 90s and 2000s turned up more artifacts: a jar of freckle cream, possibly Amelia's brand, a zipper from a flight jacket, and bones that might have been human fingers. Each find was a breadcrumb, leading nowhere concrete but too intriguing to ignore. Divers scoured the reef for the Electra, thinking it could have been swept into the lagoon or broken apart by waves. Sonar scans hinted at shapes on the ocean floor, but nothing ever panned out. The island was a tease, offering just enough to keep hope alive but never enough to close the case. The Japanese capture theory got new life too. In 2017, a grainy photo surfaced from the National Archives, showing a dock on Jaluit Atoll in the Marshall Islands, dated around 1937. Two figures stood out: a woman with Amelia's build and a man who could have been Fred. The photo sparked a frenzy. Could this be proof they were taken prisoner? Investigators dug in, but the photo's date was disputed, and locals said it showed nothing unusual. Like every lead before it, it fizzled under scrutiny. Still, the idea of Amelia and Fred as pawns in a pre-war Pacific power struggle was hard to shake. Japan was fortifying islands like Saipan, and a famous American pilot landing in their backyard would have been a problem. If they were captured, though, why no record? No ransom, no propaganda. The silence was deafening. Back on Nikumaroro, Tigar's work kept the castaway theory in the spotlight. In 2018, forensic analysis of the 1940 bones, using old measurements, since the originals were long gone, suggested they could belong to a woman of Amelia's height and build. Not definitive, but close enough to make you wonder. The distress signals from 1937 were re-examined too. Some were eerily specific, mentioning coordinates or injuries. A few operators swore they heard Amelia's voice, weak but clear, days after the crash. If she and Fred landed on Nikumaroro, they could have used the Electra's radio until the battery died or the plane was swept away. But why didn't the Itasca or Navy pick up those signals? Were they too faint, or just hoaxes born from wishful thinking? The human need for answers kept the story alive. Amelia was more than a pilot. She was a symbol of courage, a woman who defied gravity and expectations. Fred, quieter but just as vital, was the genius behind her navigation. Their disappearance wasn't just a mystery, it was personal. People wanted closure, not just for them, but for what they represented. Every new expedition, every documentary, every theory was a way to keep them alive. 70 years later, the Pacific still holds its secrets. Nikumaroro's beaches have been picked over, its lagoons scanned, yet no smoking gun has emerged. No piece of the Electra with a serial number, no diary, no undeniable proof. The Japanese capture story persists, fueled by grainy photos and old testimonies, but it's a house of cards, collapsing under the weight of missing evidence. Other theories, alien abductions, secret identities, have faded into the realm of campfire tales. What's left is a void, a question mark over the blue heart of the Pacific. Imagine Amelia and Fred in those final moments. The Electra's engines sputtering, the horizon empty, the fuel gauge creeping towards zero. Did they spot a coral reef and glide in for a desperate landing? Did they drift, hoping for a ship that never came? Or did they plunge into the sea, leaving nothing but ripples? Amelia's last radio call, "We are running north and south," feels like a message in a bottle, tossed into the waves. Maybe they're still out there, not as people, but as a story that won't let go. The truth is, the Pacific is too big, too deep, too cunning. It's a graveyard of planes and ships, of hopes and mysteries. Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan flew into it, chasing a dream, and it claimed them. Somewhere, on a forgotten reef, or at the bottom of the abyss, the Electra might still sit, its metal rusting, its story silent. Until we find it, all we have is the question: what really happened to them? And maybe that's the point. Some stories aren't meant to end. They're meant to haunt us. If these tales of the unknown grip you like they do us, dive into the pulse of mystery over at Pulse Nova US on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button and join our crew as we unravel the world's most spine-chilling stories with a vibe you won't find anywhere else. Let's keep the thrill alive.